Welcome, birders. This is Ed Pullen, your host on the Bird Banter Podcast, where birders talk birding. This episode is something new for me. Dorian Anderson, who is my guest on the Bird Banter Podcast episode number 5, recommended to me that I have Alvaro Jaramillo on as a guest. Alvaro is a big name in the birding world. He's written books. He's a well-known birder, guides tours, leads pelagic trips, is an author of both books and chapters in other people's books, and is just someone everybody wants to talk to and know about. And he agreed to come on as my guest today, and so I'm really excited about that. If you like the Bird Banter Podcast, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, and if you can, leave a review on the iTunes store. That really is helpful to me, and I'd appreciate that. But here we go with the Bird Banter Podcast, episode number 16, with Alvaro Jaramillo. Welcome, Alvaro.
Hello, how are you doing?
With me today. I'm doing great, thanks. On the Bird Banter Podcast, I try to get birders' stories. Is one of the things I like to do. And so I was hoping you could tell us how did you first get interested in birding, and how did your early days of birding and interest in birds begin?
I started out as a kid, so you don't really have much going on. If you're doing sports or something, maybe that's what's keeping you occupied. And I really was bored. I gotta say, that's where I started, from a level of boredom. And I was up north in Canada and at a cottage. So we had lake and canoes and all this stuff. And they happened to have our friends had a bird book and binoculars. So I just thought, okay, I'll do this. Kind of tired of swimming and fishing and all this stuff.
Sure.
And went out and, looked at a bird and looked it up in the book. And I thought, okay, here it is, this is the one, and, put a name to it. And from there, I just thought, well, if you can do one, you can probably find 20, 30, 40 more. So I just started looking for more, and it never stopped. It's
Sure.
still happening.
So your family had a place, or you had a place to go near Toronto?
Yeah. North of Toronto, at that point, probably a 4-hour drive north, something like that. So it was, loons and forest everywhere.
Sure,
bears,
stuff all over the place. Yeah. Cool.
kind of thing.
Cool. I guess how did interest in tropical birding become a focus for you?
Well, I was born in Chile, so what I did, in Canada, at that time, when I was going to high school, you could take all of your credits early, just sort of really front load everything, and then you could get out of school early, kind of graduate early. So that's what I did. And I thought I'd go, and I saved up money, and I'd go to Chile to go visit my family and also look for birds.
Right.
But the cool thing is, at that point in time, the cheapest airline that could get me from Toronto to Santiago was a Paraguayan airline. That probably doesn't even exist anymore. It was really, it was sort of, I remember even then the plane was old looking, so, and but you had to stop in Asunción in Paraguay. And I thought, well, I'll do that, and I looked in the map and I realized it was only, a few hundred kilometers from Iguazu Falls. And I knew people who had been to Iguazu Falls. So I asked them, so what, how does this work? Do you just sort of, can you just go there and watch birds and you don't have to worry about, jaguars or anything, And I had no idea.
Sure.
And, are there like poisonous snakes everywhere? And they said, no, they're parks, and you can walk around and, go and watch birds. So that's what I did. I went and did this stopover in Paraguay for a couple of weeks, and then went to Iguazu Falls. And in fact, in that little visited 3 countries. So it was Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil, and mostly northern Argentina. And it was pretty cool because there were no field guides at all.
I know
really,
there weren't.
that functioned. So I was using this, book called Birds of South America that just had little descriptions. There was a couple of books you just had little description, so you had to figure out if you saw a flycatcher, and it would say olive above, olive below, olive tail, olive head, and then kind of
that
try to figure 40
out of them. Yeah.
And what was really great is you got through so many of these little blurbs on the birds that you almost started thinking like the author. And when they said something like, I don't know, instead of olive, they said, green, you really knew what that meant. That you could see it in the fields
between olive and green. Yes.
Yeah. And you're like, okay, this one's green. This isn't olive, and you sort of, it was all codified in this way that once you'd read enough of them, you could actually figure out what some of these birds were. Some of them were easy, they were really colorful things, but a lot of these other flycatchers, and the puzzle of figuring them out, and had a little recorder, sort of a little hand recorder. I would record the birds, and then it's funny, but eventually I was able to even listen to some of those old recordings and realize, knowing what I know now, I knew what the bird was from the sound,
right?
Today, right. And realize that some of my identifications were actually correct even back then.
Gosh, so congratulations.
Yeah, I know. So it was this element of, it was a little crazy. I mean, I was a teenager. I was, hitchhiking, getting to Argentina, to Iguazu Falls, seeing all these cool places. And, with very little money, and just, eating whatever was available that was cheap, and just birding all day. And, if I could, getting out at night, although it was actually, that was quite difficult in those days to get out at night, because I
bet it was.
Sitting, I'd have to go back into town, to sleep. So, and it got me thinking of just discovery, and this a bit, this sort of, you were out in places where at that point not many people were birding, and you're really sort of if the book doesn't exist that has all these, no field guide even exists, it was exciting. I thought, I was lucky to be this, essentially a kid doing this, and that's where I kind of got hooked on the tropical birding, and the travel, and the idea that discomfort, at least early on, it was not comfortable. It's comfortable now when I travel. That you learned a lot about yourself, and you were put into situations that were sometimes complicated, and not just in the birds, but in trying to get from one place to the other, or encountering people who were, sometimes a little shady, and you had to sort of figure out what to do. And that whole,
I bet you have stories to tell.
Yeah. It was fun. I kind of got hooked as sort of a lifestyle of travel from early on when I was a teenager. And, it was great that the Canadian system had a way that you could kind of make time to do this between high school and university. So really wet my feet.
So you took a number, and how long did you take between high school and going to university to sort of scratch your birding itch and explore?
I think I was traveling for about 3 or 4 months, maybe. Okay. Yeah, several months.
So quite a while, but not years or anything like that.
No.
Okay. So you were pretty much a self-starter, it sounds like. Were there people in your life that were mentors or gave encouragement?
Oh yeah, I mean, there were a lot of birders in Ontario, and in Toronto, as well, that would take us places, because there were actually several of us who were teen birders, and specifically, there's 2 other good friends who were living in the Toronto area, and we'd go to Point Pelee every weekend in May, and we always had a ride, because somebody one of the adults kind of would say, hey, got to take these kids out, because they're really into this, and so forth. And And I think, we probably were pretty, we were pretty serious about it. So we also sometimes even spotted a good bird or two. So there was a benefit to having
I'm
us
sure
around.
definitely. I always love having a young set of eyes and ears and information to go birding with me. They find great stuff.
Yeah.
It's a huge plus.
So yeah, there was a
So
good number of birders who, who helped us out, and they're still friends, I mean, some of the adults who were adults then, um, we still communicate and keep in touch and so forth. So it's great.
mhm. Very cool. Very cool. So then you went to university. Did you study ornithology, or what did you major in?
Um, Evolutionary biology. So it
Okay.
was initially sort of a degree in zoology, and then with a specialization in evolution and behavior. So I
Hmm.
actually never took an ornithology course. I've never actually studied birds in school. So
Studied every other which way, but not in school, huh?
yeah, that's right. I figured. I mean, I'd learned most of the stuff in the field about what was what and how they, the the main aspects of ornithology. So I was instead taking entomology classes and ichthyology, anything else that was other creatures that I could learn more, than, in a sense, maximize the amount of knowledge that I could get from
I'm
school.
sure that's led to a well-rounded naturalist, the perfect tour guide.
Yeah, I mean, they always could know more, but at least I've got a good foundation on a lot of the stuff, so it's fun. I like to look at butterflies and newts, crocodiles, whatever whatever's
Whatever
around.
you can see. Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. Very cool. So that kind of aimed you in the direction of a career in biologic sciences, I guess, of some sort. How did your career progress from there?
Um so, you know, I I think you have, like, the real successful scientists are a really interesting set of people, and they're a varied, set of people, but they all have incredible focus, right? They know that they have to uh, kind of encounter uh, a lot of challenges in learning how to make an experiment or to do things in the field or to write up papers. And, they know all these challenges are coming up, and they sort of bit by bit kind of go up this ladder of progress, and they keep focus, and in fact, if you put me together with sort of some of these successful scientists who might have been, my contemporaries, and some of them are my friends, I didn't have the focus in the same way. My focus was always broad. I had a broad view of things rather than sort of like trying to get further and further down a specific little um, way of, trying to understand the world. I was really focused in how much time I spent in the field and doing things and so forth. But in a sense, I wasn't the good mind, and sort of to be a scientist in today's world. I would probably have been a really great scientist in the 1800s,
Yeah,
when
one of the
being more of a
Renaissance men who did
yeah,
everything. Yeah.
yeah. And so I kind of started getting that sense, at some point. So I was really great at generating ideas
Hmm.
and sorting out interesting questions. But I wasn't necessarily good at drilling down through every single one of the elements you had to do to sort of figure out what the answer to that question. And,
Right.
and I got really frustrated when my experiments or the things that I was working on didn't work. And I started sometimes thinking, maybe the theory that I'm trying to prove is completely wrong. And that's not necessarily what the professors, like, because often it's their theory. so,
Yeah.
so
I
y- it,
yeah.
so you
I was
can
a
kind of,
chemistry major in college. Like I have some memories of that. That if it didn't fit their theory, they didn't want to hear about it.
right. And so you can kind of get to the point where my point here is that I realized I had this love for nature and this, um, uh, you know, but it didn't fit really into the world of academia in the way that needed to for me to be a successful academic. Even though all my life, ever since I was a kid and became a birder, I thought I would become, a
An
professional
academic
ornithologist,
yeah.
at a university. So there was this point where I was, I'd done a master's, my master's, and then I was on my PhD for a couple of years, and I started writing a book in my spare time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a problem because if you're doing a PhD, you shouldn't have any spare time, right?
Yes, right.
And you shouldn't be doing a major project that is separate from what you're supposed to be focusing on.
You should be pretty focused.
You should be pretty focused. So I started this book on the New World blackbirds, the icterids. And
right, I saw you have that published. So it was
yeah,
a successful undertaking.
yeah,
Didn't lead to the PhD you were studying for. It sounds like, though.
No, and it's exactly what happened. I think if you had, you sat me down on a couch with a therapist or something, they would, get the real story. What it was is that I really felt like I didn't want to do my PhD, and I didn't really feel it was a worthwhile endeavor that I was doing, but I was kind of stuck and I didn't know what to do. So instead
you were headed down that pathway, and it was hard to get out of.
Yeah. So I created this other path for me, and I knew that to me, even at that point where I knew a little bit more about how things work, to me that a PhD was sort of put yourself in a situation that you're going to do something that is going to be big, new, and really complicated, so that you come out of it a different person than you came in. You kind of amass all of these skills that you just cannot do unless you're doing a big project. And my book actually became that project. So I left my PhD and I finished my book. And I feel like, I kind of traded equals, even though perhaps in sort of work wise, it wasn't the right thing to do in some people's minds, because I'd sort of gone and done this separate, completely, different endeavor that didn't necessarily get me anywhere, right? You can write a book, but
it got you where you ended up.
Well,
that's what life is.
That's
life
right.
Is a bunch of, we make our choices and we live with the consequences. That's
and in the end, exactly. It's the kind of thing that hindsight, it's like exactly what I needed to do. But at that point, you're thinking, oh man, I'm really screwing up here, leaving a PhD with a very successful lab with people doing brilliant work. And, I'm going to go write this book on blackbirds.
Write a book about blackbirds. Yeah. Like, why blackbirds?
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, I think there's about, as far as American birds, they're probably the most interesting birds we have. They just aren't always showy. Sometimes they're showy, but as far as behavior, they're really, really amazing. So I kind of clued into that part. I like them because they had all of this context, things going on that, birds like warblers don't. I mean, warblers kind of look good. They have beautiful songs and so forth, but there's not much else going on as far as, crazy behavior. Maybe some really good migration stories, but they're all in the blackbirds too. I mean, bobolink probably beats all the warblers hands down as far as the migration.
Yeah.
But
it goes a long ways.
Yeah.
So far, it has to molt twice.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I have a talk. I used to, I got to revamp this talk where I basically argue that blackbirds are about the most interesting birds we have, and nobody really cares about them.
They are. I went to Belize and had a guide there for half a day, and I asked him what his favorite bird was. Yes, I saw this wonderful bird. It was a red-winged blackbird. I'd never seen it before because it showed up in Belize, and he was just fascinated by this wonderful bird and made me chuckle. But
oh yeah, no, it's I mean, a lot of people, it's one of the first birds they see is red-winged blackbird, and they can't believe that something like that exists. And then they become birders, and they very quickly start thinking it's common, therefore it's not worth looking at, which is a problem. I think birding, and not everybody does this, but we're so seeking novelty that we forget that you can actually see new things by looking at the very things that we're comfortable with and we see all the time. In fact, you probably learn more daily by looking at common birds than you learn as a birder from looking at rare birds. But we're always interested in the rare birds because they're rare.
It's human nature to want
Yeah.
the next best thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you wrote your book, and where did things go from there?
Oh, it was kind of interesting. A lot of things sort of followed through. At that point, I also started teaching a class locally on birds. I was in Vancouver, so it was through one of the colleges or something like that, and I met this person who was retired, and he wanted to start a bird watching tour company.
Oh, okay.
And he says, "Hey, why don't you do the first tour? Why don't you lead the first tour?" And I said, "Okay." And that company, he, sort of, I was the first guide, and I got some of my friends involved, and then eventually had all of these trips. The man, Vic Smith, he sold it, and it's still out there. It's called Eagle Eye Tours in Canada.
I've seen that. Yes.
So
Okay.
it's odd, but I was the very first guide, and in fact planned all of the initial tours that Eagle Eye did.
Did you
And that was
focus on an area? Where did you take groups to with them?
the first couple were British Columbia and Alberta, and
So
then
local.
yeah, and then we branched out to Chile and Ecuador. It actually branched out very quickly to international trips, and so that some of the first international trips I was on those as well, and really learned to tour and to lead these tours on my own or with friends. We didn't have we didn't have people who were more experienced than we were. So we kind of learned on the go, and that was interesting. It was probably not the easiest way to do it, and sometimes we'd have very experienced tour participants who'd say, you guys are going to be pretty good tour guides, but at this point in time, this is what you should think about doing. They would give us tips. So,
Yeah,
and
probably
I think
more on how to run a tour than how to find a bird. Sure.
yeah, and
Separate skill sets.
right. And the thing is that at that point, Eagle Eye Tours, those early trips were actually sort of probably quite moderately priced. So people kind of knew they weren't, they were getting, there's a trade-off there, but so it was the perfect situation to learn. And then eventually I from that tour leading, I friends I had and people I'd met at field guides, they sort of started talking to me about whether I wanted to work with them. And I thought,
Right.
wow, this is like top of the line company. This is like the big
time.
leagues. This is like going from regional airline to international airline, so,
Right.
So that was great. And I learned a lot from many years working at field guides and in touring, and eventually started my own tour company. So left and
Right.
went on my own. But in between all that, I still kept doing books and teaching classes. And every so often I would get a little biological project, so I've kept my finger on science and the science that I actually can do, given that I'm not at a university and not, I don't have lab equipment or whatever. And in particular, often I've been interested in taxonomy, how birds are related to each other and so forth. So I've been working on projects of that kind, but all my sort of science is done in my spare time. So it's kind of, I'm a hobby scientist in a sense for the most part.
That's great. Take advantage of your training and still do field stuff primarily. Good for you. So you wrote the book on birds of Chile. Birds of Chile, wasn't it? Yes. And so obviously at least one of the countries now has a first-rate field guide.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, actually,
most of them do now.
I was going to say things have changed so much.
Things have changed so much. There are really good guides to almost everywhere now.
Yeah.
So that's great. But where do you lead a lot of your tours? Or do you have other co-leaders or other leaders? So how does Alvaro Adventures work?
Well, I lead a lot of the tours, and I have other colleagues lead, trips as well. Dorian Anderson is a person who's, he's leaving next month to do a trip in Colombia in the
Cool. Yeah,
coffee
I
growing.
met Durian shortly after his biking big year, and had him on as a guest a little while ago. That's how
Yeah,
I was hooked up with you. So that's nice.
yeah. And Dorian Peter Burke is a friend who's also, he last year he did a trip to Nicaragua before things kind of went a little
Yeah,
haywire
a
politically
little
in
scary
Nicaragua.
there. Yeah.
And I'm growing, the number of people slowly that are working directly on tours with me, and but there's a whole team of people that work as local guides or
Hmm.
guides in country. So in
Yes, that
fact,
can
if
be
I
really good safety thing and just local knowledge. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it's a very important aspect of touring for me because I've also been involved in training birding guides in Colombia and Belize and Guatemala and different places, and the
You were one of the
idea
big leaders in the Audubon process, which didn't Audubon undertake
yeah,
a South and Central American initiative to bring up local
exactly.
talent?
Yeah, exactly. And I was deeply involved and still am, in that process. And one of the things that is key is that tours have to, for them to not just be about recreation, but actually impacting birds in a positive way and local people in a positive way. They
Right.
have to involve local people in the you know, guiding and in the hotels and in the driving, all of these things that where you can earn money
Right.
from this international tourism, and they have to be involved. And the smaller the community that we can go to and make an impact, the greater the impact that's going to happen. Because if we bring our tour, and we stay in Cali, Colombia, that's a big city. There's people coming in there for many reasons. We just get,
Sure.
we're just
You're
one
a
of the
drop in the
many
bucket.
tourists, right? But if we go
Yeah.
to a little, you know, mom and pop type hotel that's right, in the forest, and they are keenly aware that birders are out there and they want them to come there, and we're part of that whole process. Those people then suddenly, their economy grows, and they know it's because of the forest. They know it's because of the birds. So the entire mentality of conservation becomes part of their business in a sense.
Sure. They have a good reason to not
Exactly.
cut down the forest and grow corn.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So this is sort of part of where I do think that tourism is an important key in conservation. And I know, some people say, oh, but those flights and the global warming and the thing, but if you put it all together, um,
I think that
it
it's a
it is
big
a
net
net
plus,
benefit. Yeah,
big
net
net
benefit.
benefit. I agree. I
And
agree. People are
if
going to travel. They might as well travel for good causes.
right, right. And there's also a great big focus on global warming as this massive problem, and it is. But for most birds, the real problem right now is habitat destruction. Um,
Exactly.
and that's often independent of global warming. So, if you can slow down that part, or at least, make it so that there's benefits to maintaining forest patches or marsh or whatever the habitat, grassland, you're doing something. And the benefits of all of this tourism are positive, not only on the birds but on the local people. And it's important to have that be an element of it, because then you really do get that situation that we could call a win-win, where the birds are getting the benefits of conservation, the local people are getting the benefits of economic development, and the birders coming in from another country are getting the benefits of seeing these birds, staying at these places, having great food, and meeting the local people. So it really is, I think, one of the key tools in preserving birds, and it's tourism to go see the birds
tourism
themselves.
And habitat for sure.
Yeah.
If the people there have a reason to preserve the habitat, they're going to be more likely to do so than if they can be better off by cutting down the forest and growing corn or sorghum or whatever.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So that's great. So it sounds like you've been really involved with developing a network of local guides and local resources for the birding ecotourism industry through Audubon's efforts and others. Can you give any stories that illustrate that? People with local guides that have been impacted, or kind of make that a little more personal?
Yeah. Well, there's one of the people who I met, is up in the north. And if you can sort of, and this is in Colombia,
Mm-hmm.
if you can sort of imagine the very far north, near the border with Venezuela, and there's a sort of a desert zone there, and there's a peninsula called the Guajira Peninsula, and they have a lagoon in that area that has, flamingos and so forth, but it's dry forest. And dry forest is, among the different types of forest in Latin America, it's one of the most endangered because it's very easy to cut down. It's not, it's shorter, and firewood and all these other uses for it, and then degrade it and run goats through it and so forth. So dry forest was actually one of the habitat types that the Audubon project in northern Colombia was trying to preserve. Right. And up there, there's a group of people who, have been involved in showing people the flamingos, so there's always been a little bit of a nature thing going on. And among those, there's this guy, Jose Luis Puchaina, and he's a local native. I mean, not only a native of Colombia, but he's a, fully,
before
native American.
Native, yes. Yeah. Okay.
And he, he lives there with his people, and, they're very proud people. They make, some of those colorful baskets, that you sometimes see from Colombia, and they're called the Wayu. And
right.
The great thing about Jose Luis is that he's the kind of person that I think anywhere else he would be, if he had grown up in New York City, he'd be, running some big business. You know what I mean?
Just smart, energetic, organized, ambitious. Yes,
exactly. But he also, so he saw there were some birders coming in every so often with a guide from the city of Santa Marta. This was a few years ago. Right. And then he sort of said, "Oh, look at this is going on." So he would actually kind of come in and hang out and say, "Oh, I know where you find that red bird. It's over here." And he would show them, and he started becoming kind of the local go-to person when any of these, and at that point it was very few birding trips would come through there. And he started getting a little bit more involved. And then, by the time we arrived with Audubon, he was already, he had binoculars, and he was, really knew his birds, but he was able to take this whole training and the increased number of people to a higher level. And he's become, just the local expert of birds there, and, getting great photographs, knows where to find everything. But one of the interesting things where it's very different from if we were dealing with somebody maybe running a corporation in New York City, right, is that he said part of the key here was that he wanted to teach anybody in his community how to do this. And he thought that anybody could do this. Everybody could learn English, learn the birds, all of these things, because you have to know, you have to learn English. Yeah. And they already know two languages, their local language and Spanish. So learning a third one, that's just, why not? And the thought for him was, so I've done well economically from this, and it would be immoral for me, for Jose Luis to not teach the local people and his, relatives and friends and so forth how to do this. And I
Right.
thought this was really amazing because, the way often we are in our society is if you have a skill or something
Yeah,
that's doing well
jealously
for
guard
you,
it.
guard it,
Jealously
right?
guard it.
You
Yes.
don't share it. You don't tell people how to do it. But he was completely the opposite. And I thought, wow, this is where a different culture is, doing its thing, and he's
Probably a different
gotten,
culture, and a special person too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so he's done quite well. He's been able to help train. So he's become a trainer himself, train local
Hmm.
people. They've been able to get, women involved as well, which is very important. And in many places, as you know, all over the world, there's not as many opportunities for women to work. But
For sure.
bird guiding is a, especially being a local guide where you don't necessarily have to travel long distances, is a perfect job for women, for anybody really.
Absolutely. Yeah.
um, but they can use their local knowledge and earn some money, which and doing something that's easier than weaving baskets. So,
And hopefully more lucrative. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, I thought that was great. I always think he's, an incredible person to have been able to not only pick this up even before Audubon got there, but then when Audubon got there, he was able to squeeze all that he could from this process and incorporate a big number of people. So it was
Yeah.
really,
He's
really
a
cool.
big poster boy for that.
Yeah,
Whole process. Good for him and good for you. That sounds like a great success story and just a cool thing.
yeah.
So what's coming up for you? You said you're headed off on a speaking trip. What do you see for Alvaro Jaramillo in the near future? What are your plans?
Um, well, I'm in on Wednesday, so in a few days, I'm going to Brazil, where there's a
Hmm.
massive bird fair called Avistar, and I'm going to go and give a talk, about birding and so forth. But
Hmm.
I'm really keen on seeing Brazil again, and actually, I haven't been to Brazil since I was a teenager, since that
Oh
original
my.
trip. So it's one of the big, missing spots in my travel.
Yeah.
And but I'm really keen on interacting with a lot of the local birders, because Brazilian birders bird a lot by camera. So they're photographers
Hmm.
primarily, and then they
Yes.
sort of birder as
Picture
we
match
know it
after. Yeah.
in a different way. So I want to see
Right.
how that all works. And
That's a growing trend even locally. Young birders, you see if 15, 17-year-old, they don't have binos. They just have a long lens camera and they see birds and take a picture. And, oh, that's
yeah,
what that is. And they're incredibly good at picture identification. I
yeah,
think it's so much easier to identify a bird when you can see it, see what it's doing and all that instead of just looking at the feathers. So
yeah,
it's a it's a different technique.
exactly. So I'm yeah, interested in seeing that, how it, and interacting with Brazilian birders and also some international names that are going to be there. And then, come back here for a few days, and then I go to South Africa for my first trip in Africa again in many years, and my first time in
Wow.
South Africa. So, and that's a cool trip because it's birding and wine. So we go birding, and we
Oh,
also taste the local specialty wines from various different,
very nice.
wineries. And we pioneered the whole birds and wine trip in Chile. So we've been
Hmm.
doing that for almost 10 years now. And so now we're expanding to birds and wine in other places. You can imagine, before you know it, we'll be New Zealand and Australia.
Sure. If they make wine and they've got birds, you can go there.
Yeah, that's right. And
Yeah, have to
that
do a Bordeaux and
right. Then, I think Scotland and whiskey is going to be another one.
that
Our
could
Cuba
work.
trips have a lot of rum flowing through them. So,
The cigars,
yeah.
Cuban cigars, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. And,
So,
and it does get to a little bit of my philosophy on bird touring, is that, that I think bird tourism is a way to see the world and birds are your reason that you're there. You sort of see the world through birds, but the real reason you're there is not just the birds. You want to eat the food, and
you want to experience the country and the
experience the
culture and
country,
everything. Sure.
meet people. So I have sort of a broad, more open-minded view of birding tourism. I'm definitely not the kind of company that's like, come with us and, we'll be birding all day, all night, and all we'll do is bird. I think I want a little bit more balanced, well-rounded type of trip.
Right.
Even though, so we're birding 70% of the time, still a lot, but we're incorporating
but there's an
other
occasional
things.
daylight hour or after daylight hour that's not taken up with birding and sleep.
Yeah. I mean, people want to have a social time and
I think there's room for all of those niches in the birding tourism market. The hardcore, balls to the wall birding and the cultural trip with a couple birds, and probably a significant niche for the pretty hard birding, but make sure you smell the roses too.
Yeah. I think it's,
or taste the wine.
Right. I think it's also it's really pleasant, type of travel. I mentioned, early on in my travel, there was a lot of discomfort. And, you're just trying to get to places that are hard to get to, or,
right.
And you're sleeping wherever you can get a bed, and often for the cheapest,
right.
cost. That was cool to do when I was, 17 and 18, 20.
Yeah.
But now, I feel like
you're like a pillow and a mattress now.
Yeah. Pillow and a mattress. And also, as I said, the net benefits economically of doing trips like this are greater.
Much higher for the local economy.
Yeah.
They bring more US dollars or whatever dollars to the local economy is a good thing.
Yeah. And that's what's in store for me. So a little bit of travel, and then as soon as summer, comes in, we roll into sort of the pelagic season. So that's when we...
Right. I know you have a pelagic company. Are you going to be one of I heard that Shearwater Journeys is kind of calling it quits. Are you going to be expanding to take up some of that slack? Or?
Well, I mean, we've always sort of we've been growing actually for years now, so adding a few trips in different ports over the years, and we'll just sort of see how it goes. If the demand is there, we'll definitely,
I would expect that it will be,
increase, the number of trips. But I really don't know, I don't know if our competitors are really stopping or not. And, I kind of keep that not necessarily my planning, because I just sort of, focus on what's going on with us right now and
take care of your own business. Sure.
Yeah. And there's also colleagues, that do trips in Monterey, the Monterey Bay Seabirds, who, we work with them on trips, and Redwood Region Ornithological Society does trips out of Bodega. And so we work with, they do like 3 trips, and 2 of them are, with us. So we've collaborated a lot with various pelagic operators, and hope that, all of us can, if we have to, kind of pop in with a few more trips and continue.
Meet the demand. Pelagic birding is really fun. I mean, it's great. We have Westport Seabirds up here. It does a great job. And I've had a chance. I went out on, I think, 1 trip out of Monterey and 2 or 3 out of San Diego. And yeah, I can't wait to get to the East Coast and maybe South America and Antarctic and places like that. But do you incorporate pelagic trips into any of your Chilean trips? Or
yeah, Chile is actually one of the best places to do pelagics anywhere. So on our trips, we tend to have sort of two major pelagics and then 2 ferry crossings in Chile. And then the South Africa trip will also have a pelagic day incorporated. And even when we did Spain, we actually made sure we crossed over to Morocco so we could see some and did a little whale watching excursion too. So I'm always keen on adding a bit of a boat trip to any trip that I'm on, with the understanding that some people just don't like boats, and we often give them a chance to stay back if they want to. And but it's such a, most of our world is ocean. So
yeah, if you're gonna be there, might as well get on the ocean if you can.
Right.
Yeah, that's very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to it. This, the pelagic season. So, and Dorian's, one of our local guides as well on many of those trips, and we have a an extended network of local birders who come out and spot and help, and we incorporate also young birders who we try to invite one or two teen birders on each trip so that they can get experience out, and as you said, they often are spotting some of the best birds. One of the best birds we saw last year was a horn puffin. We see tufted puffins here, but horn puffin was a big deal. And
that is,
and it was Jonah Benningfield, who's one of the young birders. He saw it fly by and he took a picture of it, and he comes running over with the camera, and he's pointing at the back of the camera, and he's like, look at this. He knew exactly what it was, but he was so excited. And I said, where'd you see that? He said, it just flew by. So we went looking around and we found it eventually on the water.
Good for you. Yeah.
So it's really, it does seem like, wow, aren't they nice to let these teen birders on board? But it's actually really
there's benefits now and later. It's not all delayed satisfaction with that. You get some immediate benefits for sure. It's always sharp young eyes always help.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit more deaf and blind every day, but so you have to incorporate the good ears and the good eyes.
For sure. So, Alvaro, if people want to get a hold of you, how would they reach out? How would they find out about Alvaro Adventures and what's going on, or take advantage of your services?
Well, we have a webpage. It's alvarosadventures.com, all one word, and it's ALVARO. And also we have Facebook site, Alvaro's Adventures on Facebook, and I'm on Facebook as well.
Okay. I'll make sure I put those things in the podcast notes so people can find them. That's great. Terrific. So I'm sure you're always looking for customers for your tours. Do your tours tend to fill up like months and months in advance, or do people still have a chance of getting on some in the next few months?
Yeah, some of them do fill up way ahead. And then sometimes we just have sort of a blip where we, trips that will fill up consistently, suddenly have openings. We actually have openings for Galapagos that's coming up in July.
Okay.
So that July. And so it's always some people think, oh, surely he doesn't have spots yet, but sometimes you just do right till the very end.
You gotta check. Good. Well, that's great, Alvaro. I want to say thank you so much for coming on my podcast today. It's really fun to talk with you and get to know a little bit about your story. Are there any last thoughts you want to pass on to people? Shout outs to anything important to you? Or
I guess I would end with just a couple of general thoughts.
Sure, I'd love that.
One of the things is people worry a lot about what they should be doing, especially if they are starting birding. What should I do? What should I buy? Where should I go? Who should I hang out? If you're having fun, you're doing it right. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter what kind of binocular you have or where you're spending your time. If it's all in your backyard and you're having a good time, you're doing the birding the right way. That's the whole point, is have a good time. And I would also say that it's important to think about the birds themselves and conservation issues and things that might even just locally, like your backyard. You can plant things or do a tree or something that just makes habitat, and it doesn't have to be, buying a piece of forest in the Amazon. It can be right in your backyard. So sort of, if these birds are giving you the benefits of happiness, try to do something for them as well, whatever way you can. And also just try to get somebody else interested in birding, because I am I am really convinced, the more I think about it, that birding is a way to save the world, and not only save the world, to save people, to make people feel healthier, feel better about themselves. To be out in nature and watching birds is much better than a lot of things that they could be doing with their time. And it adds to other things. Like you can be golfing and birding. You can be walking and birding. You can actually, bird as you drive, which, people do it, but it's not safe. But, you can see cool stuff anywhere. So
you're totally right. You're totally right. I tell people I used to hate to go to the beach. The idea of laying in the sand and trying not to get sunburned, I just couldn't imagine anything worse. And now, gosh, being at the beach is great. There's birds to see. You can do a sea watch. It's always good.
It's always an added plus. So yeah, do something for the birds, enjoy birds, and then get somebody else interested in birds. That's what I'd say.
That's 3 great pieces of advice. Thank you so much for being on the Bird Banter podcast, Alvaro. I really appreciate it. And I'll send anyone who asks your way.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me on. It was real fun.
I appreciate it. Take care. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Bird Banter Podcast, episode number 16 with Alvaro Jaramillo. You can find links in the podcast notes to Alvaro's website and to some of the things he talked about. I appreciate you listening. Until next time, good birding, good day.